The Bella Vista Flight TYERS meeting on March 21 featured a captivating presentation by Sean LUSK, Arkansas Game and Fish Commission Fisheries District Coordinator, and Jordan LINDAMAN, AGFC Reservoir Habitat Biologist. The discussion centered on fish habitat development and enhancement projects undertaken by AGFC to bolster trophy game fish populations across the state's lakes, rivers, and impoundments. LUSK and LINDAMAN, both accomplished fisheries professionals, shed light on the economic benefits thriving recreational fishing communities bring to local economies. They delved into angler preferences, revealing the top 5 game fish sought by the state's passionate fishing enthusiasts. Fish mentioned were largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, crappie, catfish, and trout. The core of the presentation focused on the critical fishery development components that nurture the growth of trophy game fish populations. LUSK and LINDAMAN provided a detailed overview of successful AGFC projects that have demonstrably enhanced the populations of these coveted fish. This insightful presentation sparked lively discussions among the Bella Vista TYER attendees, a community deeply invested in the health and vibrancy of Arkansas's fisheries. A video of their presentation follows.
Thank you very much. I think you're going to find this interesting. Please join me this morning in welcoming Sean LUSK. He's a Arkansas Game Fish Commission Fisheries District Coordinator and Certified Fisheries Professional based out of Little Rock. He received his undergraduate degree in fishery biology from Virginia Tech and completed his master's degree in fisheries management from Auburn University. He joined the Arkansas Fish and Game in 2015, so he's got a lot of experience under his belt. Joining Sean today is Jordan LINDAMAN. Jordan is also with Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. He's the reservoir habitat biologist with the Rogers field office. He joined the commission in 2015 and is a graduate of Iowa State. I thought we might get a little response from there. Okay. In 2019, Jordan was awarded the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission's Fishery Division Technical Employee of the Year Award. So that's a big honor. Before I turn it over to them, I'm going to ask everybody, please do them the courtesy. Turning off your cell phone, turn it down, turn it off, whatever you got to do. And then they are going to have a question and answer session at the end of their presentation. Please hold off on your questions until they start that. Okay, if you will now, welcome Sean and Jordan.
I can tell you, I talked to Stein. I think he signed off on your permit.
Okay.
That's
He's
on
gonna
record.
after I do.
Oh, okay.
Still waiting on Kelly or Tom to sign off on it, but it should.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Sean LUSK. I'm a biologist with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, and today Jordan and I are going to be. Oh, you can't hear me? I was told this thing was sensitive, so I guess it's not that sensitive that I could stand. I can't stand in the next room over and you still hear me.
You have to be in Benton County.
You got to be in Benton County? Okay. All right. So can everybody hear me now? Okay, good. So today Jordan and I are going to be giving you a brief discussion about a few topics associated with fisheries management. Now, fisheries management is a very broad topic. There's a gazillion different things that you could talk about. But today we're just going to be talking about 4 topics, going to be moving through them pretty quickly. And these 4 topics, we talked to Scott Haas and kind of identified some things that we thought that folks may be interested in. I think the most interest is going to be in Jordan's topics at the end, which is going to be a lot more focused on habitat. But as a quick little roadmap, today I'm going to be talking about the economic fishing or economic impact of recreational fishing in Arkansas, the top 5 most targeted sport fish in the state, and then looking at what characteristics play into creating a healthy fishery. Okay, and you can pull this room and everyone's going to come up with a different definition of what they would consider a healthy fishery to be. Some people place a really high value on catching trophy fish. Some people want to go out and be able to catch a fish on every single cast. And a lot of us are going to fall kind of somewhere in between. And it doesn't really matter what your definition of a healthy fishery is. There's 4 common characteristics that you need to come together to produce what you would consider a healthy fishery. So, and then Jordan, at the very end, is going to be talking about a lot of our efforts to enhance habitat across the state. So the very first topic I'm going to dive into is the economic impact of recreational fishing in the state of Arkansas. So for organizations like the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, it's extremely important for us to have information and estimates of what economic impact we're having, or what economic impact recreational fishing has. And the reason for that is because it helps us get the resources that we need to conserve our fisheries, to take care of our fish, our wildlife, enhance our habitat, which just directly benefits our recreational anglers, which benefits the economy, and it just feeds back on itself. And the best example of why we need to know what our economic impact is comes down to funding. So the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, we have 3 major sources of funding. The first is obviously license sales. So when you go out and you buy a fishing license, we get the money from that. The second one is excise tax. So whenever you go to Bass Pro Shops and you buy a new fishing rod, new fishing reel, fishing line, fishing lures, there's a tax associated with those products that you just bought. Now, all of that money goes into a big pot at the federal level, and then the federal government takes all that money and they divvy it up to the states based on the number of fishing licenses that were sold. So if you're in a state like Florida that sells a lot of fishing licenses, you're going to get a big chunk of that pot of money. If you're in a state that doesn't sell as many fishing licenses, you're not going to get as much funding. And the majority of state agencies across the country, those are their 2 sources of funding, right? Fortunately for the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, we have a third source of funding, and it's Amendment 75 to the Arkansas State Constitution. For those of you that are familiar with that, it was the establishment of the conservation sales tax, which was passed in the mid-90s. And that amendment passed by the skin of its teeth, barely got through. And a lot of the reason why that did get through was having information such as the economic impact, showing that recreational fishing is has a significant impact on the economy in a bunch of different areas of the state. Now, when it comes to looking at the economic impact, this is a substantial undertaking, right? Because when you go fishing, you're using gas, right? So you went to a gas station. You may have gone into that gas station and bought a hot dog, because you got to have hot dogs if you're going to catch fish. You may have stayed at a hotel when you were going somewhere. So evaluating what economic impact fishing has is quite an undertaking. But fortunately for us, we have organizations like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Now, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they've been conducting surveys of hunters and anglers at interval since the mid-1950s. It's the longest running survey in the country for fish and wildlife. And so the last survey that they completed was in 2022, and they reached out to over 100,000 individuals, and they asked a laundry list of questions associated with what do people fish for, what are they hunting, how often are they partaking in these, and they asked some economic related questions. Now, the American Sport Fishing Society takes all that information and they conduct an additional survey, and with their additional survey, they're able to really tease out the economic impact, not only at the nation level, not only at the state level, but at the congressional district level. So that's, again, is information that is extremely useful in helping Arkansas organizations like Game and Fish get the resources that we need to conserve our fish, wildlife, their habitats, which ultimately benefits our recreational anglers. Now, fortunately, the American Sport Fishery Society put together some really cool infographics. So I'm not going to try to reinvent the wheel here and put together an absolutely beautiful slide. I'm just going to show you their infographic. So this is what they put together right here. And if you're in the back of the room, there's a 0% chance that you can read anything on this, which is fine, because I think we're going to pass the slides out in the end. But the main take-home message is when they conducted the survey, which was in 2022, there was an estimated 700,000 anglers that fished in the state of Arkansas. Those anglers spent $778 million on recreational fishing, which had a $1.2 billion economic impact and created 9,500 jobs. Now, I'm not an economist, so I'm not even going to go into trying to interpret a lot of the other statistics that they have. But if you have any questions on how these numbers were generated or a deeper dive into what they mean, let me know, and I will put you in contact with the people that know what they're doing when it comes to economic impacts. So there's a lot of people that fish in the state of Arkansas, right? The question is, what does everybody fish for? What are the top 5 most sought after sport fish? And you may be surprised, you may be very unsurprised. But similar to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, we do a lot of surveys. We do a lot of surveys on specific bodies of water, and then we also do, at interval, statewide license holder surveys. And so our most recent statewide license holder survey was conducted in 2022. There's a lot of surveying going on in 2022. And similar to the Fish and Wildlife Service survey, we asked a bunch of questions about, what do people fish for? What are they catching? How often are they fishing? And we do ask some economic related questions, some expenditures. How much do you generally spend on a fishing trip? A lot of questions associated with that. And so we are able to get at what the top 5 most targeted sport fish are. So are there any guesses out there of what number 1 is? Okay, all right, very good. Yes, it is largemouth bass. They're, or black bass in general, so that's going to be largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass. And over 34% of our respondents indicated that the number 1 species, or the number 1 sport group that they target are black bass. Any guesses at number 2? Very good, crappie at 25%. Trout came in at 13%, and then catfish and brim came at 16 and 6%. So for the most part, if you're looking at the the state holistically, this probably really doesn't surprise you. When it comes to actually managing an individual body of water, we conduct a lot of surveys that are specific to that body of water. So as an example, on our trout tail races, number 1's not going to be bass, okay? It's going to be trout. And if you're in a crappie factory like Lake Conway, we generally see that crappie is number 1 followed by bass. Okay, so it really, I'll get your question at the end if that's okay.
Yeah, 13%, 16%. Curious why they're.
Yeah, I think I just switched those. I appreciate that was actually a test to see who's paying attention. So can we get him an extra raffle ticket, please? Yeah, so these at a statewide scale, these information are important to have, but when it comes to actually managing a resource, it's a lot more important to have these for a specific body of water, which we do a lot of creel surveys throughout the state. We've got a number that are going to be kicking off this spring, so you guys may have been involved in creel surveys. I know, Jordan, they've conducted some recently on Beaver Lake, is that right? Mm-hmm. And some other lakes up in this area, and we've got them going on all over the state. So now that we know that we have a lot of anglers in Arkansas, we know what they're fishing for. What does it take to produce what someone might consider a healthy fishery? So again, you could pull this entire room and I would be confident that we're going to get a gazillion different definitions of what a healthy fishery is. A lot of folks that we talk to, they generally want to see more of a balanced fishery where you can go out, you can still catch fish and you have that potential of catching a trophy. So for this particular example, I'm going to use largemouth bass. Now, this right here is a pretty good largemouth bass. This is the Arkansas state record. It weighed 16 pounds, 8 ounces, was caught back in the 70s, and it came out of Mallard Lake. You're going to go through a few bass before you come across one like that, okay? But the bottom line is the characteristics that produce this bass are pretty much standard for if you want to have what anyone might consider a trophy fishery. And again, it doesn't matter what you consider a trophy fishery. You need 4 things to come together. And you can think of these 4 components as legs of a chair. If you were to cut one of the legs off your chair right now, your chair is going to fall over and you're going to fall out of it. Well, it's the same thing with these fisheries. If you don't have these 4 things coming together, your chair is going to fall apart. Your fishery is going to fall apart. So the very first thing that you need is you need to have a solid forage base. You need to have a lot of groceries out there. And when we're talking good forage, we're not talking just numbers, but we're also talking quality, okay? So this largemouth bass right here is opportunistic. It'll eat anything. It'll eat mackerel, it'll eat little insects, it'll eat crayfish, it'll eat worms, it'll eat hot dogs, it'll eat shad. It really doesn't matter. But there's a difference between going out and eating a bunch of bugs, right? Those are kind of considered salads. You're not getting a lot of calories from that. Gizzard shad, that's a cheeseburger. You're getting a lot of calories for that, okay? So not only do you need a lot of groceries swimming around, you really need a lot of cheeseburgers out there if you're trying to shift your size structure towards larger individuals. Now, when it comes to bass, and really, again, any other fishery, another component that you need to take into account is your genetics, okay? And when it comes to bass management, a lot of times we immediately want to go towards Florida bass, right? And For a very extended period of time, largemouth bass and Florida bass were considered subspecies, but recently the American Fisheries Society has recognized them as separate species. So at this point, the largemouth bass is a different species than the Florida bass. Now, a lot of the reason why we talk about Florida bass is because given the right conditions, Florida bass have been shown to have greater growth potential than largemouth bass. But if you were to take a Florida bass and you were to drop it off in Minnesota, Michigan, it's not going to do as well as the largemouth bass. So not only do you need the growth potential, but you need genetics that are adapted to do well in a certain area, okay? And then when you can match genetics that have the growth potential with being in a certain area, that's when you start to see 16-pound fish, okay? And not all fish have growth potential. As an example, you can use people. I don't have trophy genetics. I'm never going to be 7 foot tall. It just was not in the cards for me. So there's a lot of fish that are the same way. Not all fish have the potential to reach 16 pounds, okay? So that's where the value of trying to find fish that do have that potential to get the genetic potential out there to reach these larger sizes. Now the third leg of your stool is going to be longevity. And you may or may not know what this is. This is a picture of what's called an otolith, and it's a small bone in a fish's head, and we can section that, and it acts a lot like rings on a tree. So we can count those rings and age the fish, okay? So the third component that we need is longevity. If you want a fish to reach 16 pounds, that 16-pound fish was not a 2 or 3 year old bass. That fish was probably 10 plus years old. So if your fish are not reaching, 8, 9, 10 years old, for largemouth bass, they're probably not reaching these trophy sizes, which again, depending on what you would consider a healthy fishery, you may not need fish to reach 10 years old to have a good fishery out there. But if you do want to produce trophy bass, you're going to have longevity. And longevity, what contributes to longevity is a bunch of different things. Typically we see fish dying off from natural causes and fishing related causes. And over the past several decades, there's been this huge paradigm shift towards catch and release. So a lot of times it's not coming from angling related mortality. A lot of it is natural causes. In certain areas, you may have summertime low dissolved oxygen where the fish, it stresses them out to the point that they just auger in and just don't make it through the summer. Which kind of plays into our fourth key component, and this has been possibly the biggest emphasis, I heard it out there somewhere, the biggest emphasis for the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission over the last 5 or 6 years, and that is habitat. You have to have the right habitat. You can have all the forage in the world, you can have longevity, the right genetics, but if you don't have the right habitat, you're not going to be hitting on all cylinders. And again, habitat, depending on what your species is, can be completely different. When it comes to largemouth bass thrive on relatively shallow bodies of water that have a lot of complex cover, productive, where that scenario is not going to be very good for, say, a striped bass. Striped bass do really well in Beaver Lake, something that's big, deep, clear, they have a thermal refuge. So depending on what you're managing for, the habitat could change quite a bit. And so back in the 1950s and 1960s, I was kind of considered the golden age of reservoir creation. We created a lot of reservoirs back then. And shortly after a reservoir is developed, it goes through this phase that we call new reservoir syndrome, where there's just an abundance of habitat out there, right? But over the years, all that habitat, which a lot of what that habitat is when a lot of these reservoirs were built, we basically had a river channel. We found a place where there was a choke point, built a dam there, and flooded the river channel. So there was a lot of the trees and other terrestrial vegetation that got flooded, which created phenomenal fishery habitat. Well, over 5, 6, 7 decades, a lot of that material has eroded, and we're left with largely moonscapes, right? Like if you go to Beaver Lake right now and you walk around there, it's just shale. It's a moonscape, and that's not super good for producing a lot of trophy bass. Because what produces a trophy bass is that bass that can sit in some sort of complex cover like aquatic vegetation, just sit there all day like a couch potato, wait for some cheeseburgers to swim by, go eat a cheeseburger, and then hunker back down on the sofa and just let all that grease just soak into its belly, right? That's where, you gotta tell I'm already thinking about lunch a little bit, but that's where you get larger bass. So it really comes down to habitat. And because a lot of our habitat, just not only across the state of Arkansas, but across the country, it's one of the biggest issues that fisheries managers are facing right now. And so we've recently, with Game and Fish, formed a habitat team. It's currently got 4 members. Our 5th member will start on April 1st, and we're hoping to eventually expand that to having 10 members. But what the Habitat team does, which Jordan's a part of, is they're putting a major emphasis on all of our aquatic habitat issues across the state. And there's not a one cure fix all type thing. If you look at reservoir or streams, a lot of them have much different habitat issues than reservoirs, which have different habitat issues than smaller lakes. In some situations, we need to increase the amount of complex cover. In other situations, there's too much complex cover. We need to try to thin some of that out. Other areas, it's beneficial to create fish attractors, around bank fishing sites. So we've recently put a big push towards habitat enhancement, and I don't want to steal any more of Jordan's thunder, but he's getting up here to talk about our 4th topic of the day, which is our statewide habitat enhancements.
Thanks, Sean. Y'all hear me all right? I feel like you can. I'm Jordan Lindeman. This good?
Yeah, bend the mic up a little bit.
You got to be in Benton County.
Perfect. There we go. I can hear myself now. There we go. I'm Jordan. Thanks for the intro, Sean. I'll just jump into it. It's easier for me that way. I'll just go through it again. Well, back in 2022, AGFC kind of redid an AGFC strategic plan, kind of give us the public and ourselves accountability on what we do as an agency, kind of hold ourselves accountable, let the public hold us accountable. What we say we're going to do, we actually are going to try to. We're going to do it, but you guys can know what we're trying to do. And one of the priorities, was conservation and enhancing of statewide habitat, and that can. I can't see. Got it. And some of the strategies that we're holding ourselves true to is renovating 3 lakes, conducting major habitat enhancements on 30 reservoirs across the whole state, restoring streams, leveraging more money on grants, and renovating fish hatcheries. We're conducting 2 now. Charlie Craig and Centerton's just got funding, I think $5 million, maybe up to, I think it's around $5 million we haven't funded so far to do a big renovation up there in the next few years. But that kind of led us, we have all this accountability, but who's responsible to make sure we conduct these goals and strategies? And that kind of led us to the formation of the habitat team. We have stream habitat biologists already throughout the state, and so we're going to let them take care of the streams. We have hatcheries and contractors. We'll let them do the big major renovations on the hatchery. But that kind of left a void, like I said, and that left us to kind of the formation of the AGFC Reservoir Habitat Team. And we're spread out across the state right now. The state. I'm sorry. I need to take a break for a second. And the state as a whole, fisheries divisions broke up into 10 districts across the state. Most of them only have 2 people. The other half of them had 3. So we tried to realize how can we utilize the people we have already and kind of let them focus on habitat while also focus on district management. So we took half of those away. So there's me and 2 other biologists, and we have 2 technicians. And I'm mainly focused on habitat construction. Elizabeth in the pink is focused on kind of vegetation issues. She's in South Arkansas, so a lot of their issues is lowland, invasive species, and just vegetation issues. And then Will, he's in the back right, and he's kind of focused on land use, policy, and fertilizations. So we're all kind of have our own specialties, and we all work together, but just throughout the state, we all have just different problems that we have to task. But the main objectives of our team are habitat construction, like I said, vegetation management, water quality issues, land use policy, and then hopefully in the future, coming up this year and from here on out, is habitat evaluations. One of the biggest things is we know habitat, for the most part now, attracts fish and congregates fish. But the biggest overarching question, especially throughout the whole country, is the habitat we're doing and putting in, is it just making fish come there so you can catch them easier, or is it actually growing the population, making fishing better? Which we know it is, at least for fishing wise, but for the fish, is it making them better, or does it just make it easier to catch? Which some people don't matter. To me, sometimes when I'm just catching fish, it doesn't bother me. But at the same time, I'd like to know that it's also helping the fish population out too. But for habitat construction, we kind of break it down into two aspects. It can be artificial and natural structures. Some examples of projects we did just this last year, probably, I should go back a little bit. Our habitat team was formed around this time last year. And we still have our district duty, so we still did all our management of springtime electrofishing, running nets like that. So we really didn't get a good start until probably summer. And we were able to do 7 or 8, and these aren't all the projects we did, but just the ones I was involved in. But we did more in South Arkansas that I wasn't there for. But some of the artificial structures we do are spider buckets. Let's see, where's the pointer at? This might be easier.
Push a button on the end.
The blue one?
I think so.
No, that's a flashlight.
No, that's all right. Push it again.
Push it again. There it is. So we do spider buckets. It's mainly just PVC. It's really good for crappie. We just kind of stick in a bucket. One of the guys in Central Arkansas came up with this, what they're calling tarantula buckets. A lot of our clientele were wanting us to have, they like fish in spider buckets, but they're so dense they're always getting hung up. So we kind of thought of a way we could kind of have best of both worlds. You still have some density, but you still have some interspatial space between them, so you can actually fish within it. These are called Georgia cubes. They're fun to construct. They last forever, and they're easy to fish. You don't really get hung up on them too much, but they work pretty good. You can make them very tall like this one, just kind of experiment to see if it would work. And then otherwise they're just normally up to his head. We don't really have a term for this. Another biologist kind of came up with this, kind of a mixture of a mossback fish attractor, I'm sure some of y'all are familiar with, and kind of a Georgia cube. We just had extra supplies donated. A lot of the artificial structures we do are kind of opportunistic. We get supplies donated. A lot of we got a bunch of PVC last year that was kind of leftovers or extra from a hardware store. So we got a couple, I'd say probably equivalent to a semi-load or more of just PVC we could use. The one thing I mainly focus up here in the Ozark Highlands is natural structures. There's a lot of cedar trees to go around, and it's easier for me, I guess we have the equipment up here, it's easier for us to do natural structures than it is in some of the South Arkansas where there's not trees available, or there's water use restrictions where you can't use PVC and plastics. And that's kind of where they don't have it. But up here, like at Beaver Lake, for instance, the Corps doesn't allow us to put any plastics in the water. So we're not even allowed to do moss backs. We're not allowed to do pretty much anything I had on the previous slide. So I'm stuck strictly doing natural structures. That can be oak cribs, making brush piles out of cedar trees. We have 40+ Christmas tree donations across the state. Especially up here, we get a lot of donations from Walmart and Home Depot and Lowe's. Seems like every year they have semi-loads they didn't sell. They give to us, and we kind of go around and sink them in some of the smaller lakes. Crappie condos are the thing in the bottom. It's mainly just river cane, but it's really nice in the deeper lakes. You can get those to be 30, 40 foot tall. So depending on water fluctuations, they're always in a good zone to catch fish. And then another big thing we work on is vegetation management, whether that's trying to get rid of plants or trying to establish plants. Oh, I only have one slide, sorry. I've readjusted this thing so much. But in the middle here this is Sean's baby, so I don't want to take too much credit for this. I didn't have anything to do with it besides presenting on it today, but it's called the Arkansas Cube. They're doing it in DeGray. We're kind of spreading out to other lakes across the state. We're going to try to do it in Beaver this year, but more or less is we get a bunch of coontail and other aquatic plants and kind of throw it inside the cage and let natural wave action disperse the plant and try to establish coontail and other species that way. And years, like for decades, we've been trying to go in, plant it where we think the plant needs to be. Sometimes it takes for a year or two, dies out. So this way we're trying to let the plant figure out where it best can survive instead of us trying to tell it where to survive. Because to us, we know we have ideas, but it's still a guessing game. So at least this way, we'll let the plant decide where it goes. We do a lot of water wheel planting on the rivers, but one of the biggest things, especially in South Arkansas, is invasive species. So we do a lot of contract spraying. This is water hyacinth down below in South Arkansas, which is not good. Luckily, we don't have it here. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what he's actually spraying, but we do a lot of spraying. I can't remember how much money. We probably contract a few $100,000 worth of invasive species spraying every year. And there's a fine line. Like we just found last year, for instance, on Lake Elmdale, over there in Springdale, we found curly-leaf pondweed. And at first it's good. I wouldn't say it's ever good, but any aquatic plant can be good, but when it's at low densities. But most invasive species will go from 5% coverage, which would be ideal, to 100% or 80% overnight, like exponential growth. And next thing you know, we're spending 50 grand a year trying to correct that problem. And that's kind of what we're seeing on Elmdale now, where we didn't really see it forever, and then all of a sudden within 2 years it went from no coverage to just 50% coverage, which is not good. And then it dies off quickly. Next thing you know, we have algae blooms, blue-green algae blooms. And so on one hand, you really want vegetation, but you gotta be very careful also, because it can get out of hand, and next thing you know, instead of putting money into habitat construction or management, now you're spending your whole budget on just trying to remove something you don't want there. So then instead of being able to do good stuff, you're just trying to backtrack and get rid of stuff you don't want. So there's always a really fine, narrow area where you can play in. And one of the big things another aspect of our jobs, our habitat team, is water quality and land use policy. Land use policy isn't huge around here, but like Central Arkansas and Lake Conway, it's one of the bigger things that Will has to deal with, whether it's dock permitting, encroachments on our AGFC owned lakes, liming and fertilizations. But that one's kind of like the third tier, doesn't take up as much time as the first two, but it's still very, very important. But now I'll get to the fun stuff. Now that I kind of stumbled my way through those first slides, I'll get to the funner stuff for me at least. Is the large scale projects that AGFC's done. We started really doing these in 2016 with Goose Ferry Lake. Since then we started to do two large scale projects a year. And when I say by large scale, I mean like it's a multi-week project with people from across the state. We'll have 40 or 50 employees all to get together over a 2-week period and just try to inundate, whether it's a cove or a lake or whatever the project is, just try to put as much habitat in as we can in a short amount of time, utilizing natural or artificial habitats depending on the lake and restrictions. And some of the projects we've done, at least around this area, that you might be familiar with is in 2019 we did Swepco Lake. And that was kind of one of the first times that I guess the first big project we did up around this area. And we were able to put 63 habitat sites in, utilizing hardwoods and cedar trees from Swepco property. And we were able to make deep water and shallow sites, more or less every point and every cove was able to get some structure. But it worked out good. We had many X's loading the barges. We were able to use our dump barges to load them off. Anglers really liked them at first. Some of the anglers were kind of disappointed in it. We kind of ruined all their good fishing spots, but a couple years later we don't hear anything. All we hear is praises. They're all catching big fish off them, and so it seems to be working pretty good. In 2021 we were able to get a grant through the Reservoir Fish Habitat Partnership. We teamed up with Beaver Watershed Alliance. Beaver Watershed Alliance is a nonprofit group here locally. We teamed up with them. They put in for a grant, and we were awarded 40 grand to do a project on Clifty Creek, to do a bank restoration, and our match to that grant, because you'd have a one-to-one grant. It was a one-to-one match for the 40,000 grant. And so our match was doing a habitat project on Beaver Lake. And we kind of did that mid-lake. We were able to put 145 sites around Prairie Creek area. We probably utilized 900 to 1,000 cedar trees from the lake. We just cut, drug down, loaded onto barges, and sank them in the lake. Worked really good for crappie. I've caught crappie, walleye, and bass on all of them, different times of the year. They're really big structures. So depending on what type of year, what fish can be in the bottom of them, and 40 foot of water, or in the summertime when it gets really hot, thermocline sets up, you can still fish them because they're still up. All they'll go from 40 to 30 foot or up to 10 foot of water, I'm sorry. But I do want to touch on this. This is something, I guess, are y'all a nonprofit? So this is something you could do through the Reservoir Fish Habitat Partnership. You could put in for grants to work with Bella Vista and do habitat projects. It's hard for agencies to do it because you get that before. Easiest way to go about it is having a nonprofit to use the funnel the money through and do that. And the more partners you have, the higher up the list you can go for the grant. But every year they award roughly $40,000 to $70,000 grants. I think this year they might have awarded 8 to 10 of them. So that's an option. It's all about habitat with those grants. So you come up with a project, propose it, whether it's natural or artificial, and I can help you through that if you got questions later, if that's something y'all want to do, to try to apply for. That's what we did for the 2021, and it kind of really kicked off what we did next, because we used that funding as kind of motivation to like, oh, I didn't realize that this was out here for everybody. Let's try to go out and see if we can get some more. So we kind of used that project to kind of leapfrog to a Bass Pro grant that was given out in 2022, and we were awarded $275,000 to do work in Bull Shoals, Beaver, and North Fork Lakes. And with that, we were able to buy another dump bed, or another dump barge, which these are kind of cool boats. If I can get this. They're like 27-foot boats, but the whole top right here lifts up so you can load trees onto the front of them and then just dump big piles wherever you want. And then there's also twin motors on the back so you can cut monster trees down and drag them in the water as well. But without these 2 grants, we wouldn't have been able to get these boats. So sometimes it's just thinking outside the box on ways to get money. And it's not just government agencies and stuff that can get these grants. There's a group just like yours in Illinois called, what are they called? Lake Shelbyville, Friends of Lake Shelbyville. And they make kind of like those Georgia Cube things like I showed earlier in the presentation. And they got awarded $40,000, I think 2 years ago, just a group like yours, teamed up with the Corps or their local government, and they were able to do all that too. So that is a possibility. But for part of that grant, we're on Bull Shoals. We did 128 sites in a 2-week period as well, 700 cedar trees. Ended up using 35 pallets of block to sink all those trees. But you can see in mid-lake, like Bull Shoals is bigger than Beaver Lake, but you can see like we inundated the whole middle section with habitat sites. So, and these cedar trees will last decades. So even 15 years from now, you can go back and still fish these trees. This past winter on Beaver Lake, we did a 2-week project. In the first week, we weren't able to cut any cedar trees down just in the base of the location of where we were at, but we made 55 new sites. We used oak lumber from a local sawmill over there on 412. Gave us a really good deal on oak, and we were able to make some cribs that we sank those mainly around Hickory Creek area. And then we also teamed up with the Corps. They did a big renovation at Montanay, where they wanted to clean up all the trees, kind of make it where it's a friendlier park, get some of the riffraff out of there and stop having litter. So we ended up cutting down 3 acres worth of trees, loading those onto our barges, and sinking those all in the Montanay arm as well. So it's like a lot of the things we do are kind of opportunistic, really, because that was kind of a last-minute effort when we heard they were doing that. And then the second week of the project, we did another 64 sites up around the dam in Lost Bridge area. Did about 400 sites. Just these are really big efforts. Like a lot of these, doesn't cost a lot of money per se, and just gas and stuff, but mainly just labor. So like the project cost might only be $5,000, but realistically you can probably bump up to 30 or more just in labor and salaries. So the more volunteers you can get, more people on the ground, a lot of these projects that might seem unattainable really become realistic and attainable. But one of the other big thing that we're doing, we just started up this past year, is the Northwest Arkansas Fish Habitat Alliance. It's kind of a mixture of me and John out of our office in Rogers, Beaver Watershed Alliance, Greg Bohannon, who's a professional fisherman around these areas. I don't want to hit anybody with a laser, I'm sorry. The guy's a hook, line, and sinker and mossback out of Tawnytown. And what we're trying to do, it's still in the early stages, we're still trying to get funding, but we're trying to link it to the schools. We can go in, teach the teach the school kids, go and teach classes about fishing, teach them about conservation, try to get them involved, get them hands-on, building habitat structures, and then throwing them in some of our smaller neglected lakes that we don't get as much kind of forethought for us, at least not always for us, but like for grant-wise, we always think beaver because it's the easiest thing to do. We got our big barges, but we kind of forget about Lincoln Lake, for instance, but it still needs it just as much as Beaver Lake does. So this is one of those things that we're trying to get the kids involved, let them come on school projects or field trips per se, I'm sorry, come out, build structures with us and get involved and actually sink structures. And so far we've made it, in the first year we had interest from 10 schools. We kind of sent them out to all the schools. We got 7 or 10 schools that were actually interested. We went out, tried to get funding. We just went to Bass Pro Shops. We're still waiting to hear from them. And we got a couple other people we're still waiting to hear from funding for. But so far we got enough money at least raised this year to do 3 projects. We're doing one with Cedarville schools. We're going to do a project utilizing those bottom right structures on Lake Fort Smith. We'll try to do probably about 30 to 50 structures with those kids over a 2-day field trip period. And then Lincoln Lake will be putting out, I want to say 3 or 4 of these mossback fish cities around on Lincoln Lake. But the one thing I'm really excited about is Harbor Schools. Harbor School is how they have a greenhouse, and they're allowing us, or they're actually doing it for us. They're raising eelgrass for us. So we're going to try to get some eelgrass established, try to put it back in Bobkid Lake. Bobkid historically always had lily pads. There's a couple of drought year. It was a drought year mixed with some really bad high flow springs, kind of knocked out all the lily pads in that lake. So we're trying to figure out a way to get some vegetation established back in that lake, and then kind of monitor it. There's so many. But this way, it's such that's so. Sean can attest to it. Sean did this for years back when he was assistant biologist or assistant district biologist. They focused on planting eelgrass and other plants like that. It's very labor intensive. So we're hoping that having the school kids involved, we can get the kids out in early summer or midsummer and get out and actually get hands on, feel like they're a part of it, and plan all this stuff for us. Hopefully I didn't stumble through it too much. Hopefully I left a lot open to ask for questions. I'm sure I did. But that's all I got. And go State. They play at 6:30, so make sure you watch it.
Anybody have any questions?
Hold on, wait for the mic.
Can you guys comment on fish mortality and live well catches for tournament fishing?
That's not my wheelhouse. Sean might be able to speak on that. That's not in my. I just like to get my hands dirty, throw stuff in the water. That's been, yeah. I'll let you handle that one, Sean.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge topic in the black bass management world right now, because if you think about when you go out and you're fishing a lot of tournaments, you are targeting the biggest fish out there in the population. You know, if you think of the size structure, it's kind of like a pyramid. You're targeting all the fish up here at the top of that pyramid. And there are, in certain conditions, certain scenarios, especially during the summertime, and you're catching those fish deep and then they're riding around in the live well all day, there's a significant amount of stress that's placed on those larger, older fish. And so there's a significant amount of research that's going into finding ways that we can try to increase the survival of fish that are riding around in live wells right now. And our black bass program is working on kind of they started to work on a little project with a boat manufacturer to look at ways that they can modify live wells to try to increase survival of those fish.
Several years ago, there was a stocking of tiger bass in Oklahoma on Grand Lake. Has the state of Arkansas done that? And if so, has it been successful? And is there a future potential for potentially doing that?
Yeah, so when we talk about tiger bass, what a tiger bass is it's a first generation cross between a largemouth bass and a Florida bass. And it's specific to a hatchery in Alabama called American Sportfish. And so the value of these F1s, these first generation hybrids, is they have what's called hybrid vigor. Okay, so they have the aggression of a largemouth bass with the growth potential of they have the aggression of a largemouth bass with the growth potential of a Florida bass, which could be the ultimate bass, right? So when it comes to stocking those later generation crosses, so like an F1, it really depends on what you're doing. In smaller bodies of water like ponds, those absolutely work. You can look at a lot of pond consultants around the southeast where they have stocked. They work the best when you have a pond that you're starting completely over from scratch and you put tiger bass in there. That first generation, you're going to crank out some good fish, assuming you have the right habitat, you have the right forage, all of those things are coming together. I'm harping on that, I'm harping on those four components. As long as that's coming together. In Arkansas, what we stock, at least Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, what we stock are pure Florida largemouth bass, or pure Florida bass. And the reason why we do that is because I'm going to use one of the lakes from my old district in south central Arkansas. Lake Ouachita and DeGray. So we stock pure Florida largemouth bass in there. And the reason for that is because what we stock is a drop in the bucket compared to what's reproduced naturally. So when we roll in and we stock 100,000 fingerlings, relative to what's reproduced, that's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent. So what we're stocking, more than likely, you will never catch, okay? But that's not the reason why we're stocking those fish. The reason why we stock those fish is because we put them in there, a percentage of them are going to reach maturity. Once those fish reach maturity and begin spawning, they're going to start integrating those genetics throughout the population. So we can never produce enough fish to compete with what's reproduced naturally, but we can still alter the genetic composition through natural reproduction. George's got something else.
Yeah. Another clarification I'll say is I talked to Oklahoma. We had a meeting with Oklahoma actually last week, and they brought that up too. They tried stocking F1s back a decade or two ago, and they had no success, which isn't overly surprising based on the elevation of where Grand Lake is. So they are going to go try. They got a bunch of funding through I think Kevin Van Dam to try again. We'll see if it's successful. Florida bass up in this area of the state, Swepco Lake's the only one that has a population. That's just a coal or a warm watered coal fire plant lake, so it's always has the right conditions for Florida bass. So we'll see. Maybe we'll get lucky. Maybe Grand will have some potentials and we can do the same thing in Beaver. But as of right now, I don't got my hopes up. But I hope. I mean, their Florida bass would be cool, but I don't want you to get the wrong impression.
I had a question about grants you had mentioned, and there must be a process. I mean, if the club identifies a need and then you turn around and we apply for grants, but we need an expertise in between there. So does that make sense to you? I mean, we see a need, the expertise has to confirm the need, then we apply for the grant. And are there point people like yourself, Sean, that we can go to get a little bit of tutoring to get a grant application moving forward? And, you know, we count on the university, I believe, their biologists down the road there to guide us a little bit in the scientific realm. Do you follow where I'm trying to do?
Yeah.
And
I mean, you could contact me. I'd be willing to help. I think Rick would be a great person to work with for your lakes, to be honest. He knows exactly what's going on in your lake. And it'd benefit y'all and the grant if you just work together and apply for what you wanted to do. I can help you through the steps. It's not that hard. Y'all have to, as a group, you'd have to become I want to say it's called a Friends of Reservoirs chapter. I think it's like $20 to be able to apply for their grants. And maybe $50, not much. But then you can apply for their grants. They do small grants. They do $2,000 Mossback grants that aren't as crazy with what you want to do and with the back details or the backlogs. And then you can apply for the bigger grants. And but I can help you through those, what they're looking for, because they do have hierarchies of kind of what they're looking for. So the more partners you have, the higher up the list you go. If you get in-kind donations, the higher up you'll go. In-kind donations can be monetary, or it can just be volunteer work. So a lot of our in-kind that we use is just kind of our salaries, which we were going to do the project anyways, so we might as well try to capitalize on it. Is how we go about it. But the other groups, though, they can, like the Friends of Lake Shelbyville, I think that's what it is called. What they're called is they get a lot of outside funding. They have banquets and stuff, so they might raise 20 grand, use that as a match, and try to get another 20 or 40 brought in through those grant processes. But yeah, I'd be willing to work with you and try to help you go through that route. But yeah, I'd talk to Rick too. They'd be great to work with. They know exactly. I haven't been on a Bella Vista Lake in 9 years, so I can tell you what I know, but I don't, without being on there, I can't tell you exactly, you know.
I think we had one more question back here.
So you're talking about possibility of grants. Does that include private or member-only lakes?
Yeah, it should.
Wouldn't these lakes here be private, so does that work for grants?
Semi-private.
I think,
Semi-private.
but I think it shouldn't be an issue. I might have to dig deep dive into it a little further, but I don't think it would.
One more thing, Lance. I've got to put in a plug for the fly tyers here. Jordan mentioned the Centerton Fish Hatchery. The land for that fish hatchery, the original 40 acres, was purchased in 1938. It has a natural spring and a deep well on it. Since then, it's grown to 140 acres. The money raised to purchase that land was led by a cat named Charlie Craig, who put together a campaign of $2 donations to purchase that land for $1,800. And then in 1994, the Amendment 75 ballot to raise the 1/8 cent sales tax was first declined by the Arkansas State Attorney General because he didn't like the language. Well, Charlie Craig and several others put together an effort to get that language straightened out and put back on the ballot in 1996, and then it was passed. So that 8 cent sales tax, which goes specifically for game and fish and parks, cannot be used for anything else but game and fish and parks. And it enabled hiring talented young guys like Jordan and Sean here. And then in 1998, out of gratitude, the Game and Fish renamed the Centerton Hatchery after Charlie Craig. It's now the Charlie Craig Fish Hatchery. And how that ties to fly tyers is Charlie Craig was one of the original fly tyer members. He created the fly tyers back in 1976.
All right. Well, we have been in high anticipation of this presentation, and boy, did you guys deliver. Sean from Little Rock and Jordan from Rogers. Let's give them a big hand. Yes, and on behalf of the Bella Vista Fly Tyers and our guest, we'd like to give you a certificate of appreciation. Let's see, this is Jordan. Thank you. And Sean. Thank you both so much.
Look over here, guys.
Appreciate it. All right, thank you very much. Oh, hats too. You guys get Bella Vista Fly Tyer hats.
We're gonna start coming back here more often.
We hope so. Come back.
Over here again.
We'll even take them to lunch.
Well, we do need to pay for lights.
Yes, sir. And as far as lunch, yeah, some of us had already talked about going down to the country club for lunch. And Sean and Jordan, I believe you guys are going to join us. So that's where we'll be going. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.